I'm doing well. Thank you for asking. Yeah, we're getting some rain and hail here, so we're always in a drought-stricken area, so we're always grateful for any moisture we get. Are you in the Las Vegas area?
We're in Mesquite, which is 80 miles north of Las Vegas.
So you're the same thing. You're always kind of in a drought as well.
Oh, yeah, always. And, we love rain. I went up last night and near the Virgin Peak and just smelled the rain, and it smelled good.
Yeah, so we're grateful for every little bit we get.
Yes. And, we'll go. I think we went 200 and some days.
Yeah, it's terrible. Yeah, and then in January, I got a note from P&M, our local utility company, telling me to pack a go bag because we're in a fire danger.
Oh, are you really?
Oh, yeah, and I'm back in Arroyo. I'm looking at trees and everything, so it could happen. But anyway, I'm grateful for today. It's beautiful.
Welcome to The Art Box, your podcast dedicated to exploring the vibrant art scene in Nevada and beyond. Join us as we embark on a journey through galleries, theaters, studios, public lands, and streetscapes, meeting the artists, curators, archaeologists, nature lovers, and cultural influencers who shape our creative community and our world. Whether you're looking for your next cultural adventure, seeking inspiration for your own artistic pursuits, or simply curious about the world of art, tune into The Art Box. Together, let's open up a world of creativity and imagination. Let's dive in.
Dreams, what if the night is about you and me? So lift your head up to the sky.
Hi, this is Steve from The Art Box. We'd like to welcome Ana Pacheco today, a New Mexico artist and historian. So welcome to The Art Box.
Well, thank you for having me.
Yeah, and do you want to tell us a little bit about your background, which drew you to both art and history? And one other thing, actually, I was just talking to Susie, who does another podcast here for us, and I was telling her about you, and I said, you have relatives back in 1692.
I know it's hard to believe, but that was the interesting thing about Santa Fe. Until about World War II, people didn't do a lot of moving around, people from northern New Mexico. And so things pretty much were, there was not a lot of movement until after World War II. And so it's not the same anymore. But many Hispanic New Mexicans can trace their family lineage as far back as I did, and sometimes even further, because there wasn't a lot of, and this was a small state. So there wasn't a lot of people moving here. So there wasn't a lot of intermingling with other people as well. But so anyway, my name is Ana Pacheco. And Santa Fe, New Mexico is my hometown. My family settled here in 1692. And the interesting thing about 1692, the Spaniards actually get here in 1598 to settle northern New Mexico. They were actually even here earlier than that. In 1540, Coronado de Vázquez, another Spanish explorer, came to New Mexico. But the founding was actually in 1598 by Don Juan de Oñate. So when they all get here, they're really not, they're pretty cruel to the indigenous people. And by 1680, the indigenous have had it with the Spaniards. So they kick them out for 12 years. So that's called the Pueblo Revolt of 1680. So my mother's family gets here with the second wave of Spaniards in 1698. But there are actually people still around that can trace their family lineage to the first settlement in 1598. This is my hometown. As a young woman, I lived in Midtown Manhattan in New York from 1976 to 1992. And my career in New York was in advertising. I sold ad space for magazines. And I came back in 1992 because my mother was dying of 4-stage breast cancer. And then after she did pass away 18 months later, I decided to stay here. Because my background was on the business side of publishing, I knew all about circulation and advertising. So I founded and published a history magazine here in Santa Fe from the spring of 1994 until the winter of 2009. It was called La Herencia, which means the heritage in Spanish. It was a bilingual English-Spanish quarterly magazine. So, but the reason I was able to make it successful for so long is I was the one who sold the ads, and I knew all the background of the business side of publishing. But the interesting thing about that, so my mother's family is the one, her last name was Ortiz. Her family is the one that settles in Santa Fe in 1692. And she brought me back here. She was dying of cancer in 1992. So exactly 300 years later. So I honestly feel that everything I've done since her passing, it's kind of like my mother brought me back here. And then I closed the magazine in 2009, and I started writing books. And I was the city historian of Santa Fe from 2017 to 2019 or 2015 to 2017. I forget now. And then if you've seen my website, historyinsanta.fe.com, I've created, close to 100 history videos. I do all these blogs. I have a Santa Fe guide. So none of this would have been possible, I think, if I hadn't gone to New York and gotten all this professional experience. But none of this would have occurred if my mom hadn't brought me back here. And that's my story.
So when you went to New York, had you graduated college or you went there for college?
No, I was 19. I had 3 semesters of college under my belt. I was a theater major at the College of Santa Fe. Okay. And I had this college teacher, this drama teacher, who in her heyday was a very famous Broadway actress. And she kept saying to me, Ana, you've got to quit school and go to New York and be a writer. And of course, the acting class, there was no writing involved. It was like pantomime and just different, whatever you did in acting back then. But somehow she saw something in me about writing. So after she kept suggesting that I do that, on April the 4th, 1976, I quit school and I went to New York City.
New York City!
And I stayed there for 16 years until winter of 1992.
Wow. I mean, was that kind of like a Mary Tyler Moore moment or something?
I didn't even see it like that. When you're young, at least for me, when I was young, I was fearless. I didn't even think about it. I was just one of these I was going to do it. And within 3 days, I had an apartment. I was waiting tables. I was working an off-Broadway show I was doing lights or stage managing. I forget what I was doing. But I was just I didn't even think about it. Didn't even, now in retrospect, it's like, what was I thinking? I was 19 and I moved to the largest, the most populated city in the country. And I did. And I just hit the ground running. But I think when you're young and fearless, I think that's probably the good thing about when you're young. You don't stop to think about everything. Because if I did, I probably would have never gone.
That is probably true. So did you drive?
Oh, no, I flew.
Did you?
And back then, I think I flew to JFK. LaGuardia is the airport that most people use. But I think back then, JFK was still like the major airport you use. So I flew out there, and I actually knew one person, a gentleman that I had gone to high school with, and he let me stay with him for a few days until I could get myself situated. So I did know one person. But the main thing was that I was involved in theater right off the bat. So I just, it was just so much going on in New York City. So it was not a problem trying to it wasn't paid work, but I would right away got involved with different productions. So I found a community almost immediately.
Yeah, you went there with a tribe waiting for you.
Yeah, so it just all worked out. And I'm older now. And just looking back on that, I am so grateful for that time that I had in New York, because what an incredible life. It was so exciting back then. I don't know if you ever get to New York now. It's like most places in the country. It's gotten so expensive that all the creative, all the crazies, they can't afford to be there as much as they were in the past. And so for me, when I got there, it was the worst time to ever have arrived in New York, apparently. It was like New York City was going through its worst fiscal, whatever, the city was going broke. Abe Beam was the mayor. And there's, kind of like you see these movies from that era, there was graffiti on all the subways. It was just out of control. And I freaking loved it. I loved every second of it. It was so exciting. And to be a young person in New York, I used to go to Broadway shows. I mean, I just had a great life. And I really think that a city like New York is a young person's town. And I think it's really great that when young people are able to experience something like that.
Did you have a car there, or you just use public
Oh,
transportation?
of course. No, not at all. You don't drive in New York. As a matter of fact, when I moved back in 1992, I hadn't driven for 16 years. Or, and so it took me, I started driving as a kid, like 14 or 15.
Right.
But when I came back, I was, I was 34 or whatever, how old I was then. And I hadn't driven for years, and I was afraid to drive. I got back into it, but initially I was apprehensive of driving because I hadn't driven in all those years. And then this is the other thing. I lived in this really rough area because it was cheap rent. It's called Hell's Kitchen, and it was between 48th. It was on 48th Street between 9th and 10th Avenue. So all those tenements, even probably today, they have gated windows. So when I came back, I was afraid to be on the ground floor without gates on windows.
Yeah.
I was quite comfortable living in a cage. Well, if I had all the money in the world, I'd still have a small little place there and spend time there if I could. But I don't have all the money in the world. But, it's still a special place, even though it's changed a lot. Everything has changed a lot. This is the energy of the city. On a Sunday, you could just walk for 20 or 30 blocks and the world is happening. It was just, I'm so glad that I had that in my young adult years. Well, that was the interesting thing about living in New York for that. It didn't happen every day, but in Manhattan, you could actually run into people you knew in different parts of the city. Isn't that hard to believe now? Now it is. But when you live there and you work there, and maybe people had the same patterns, I don't know, but you would actually run into people you knew, sometimes on the subway or in a Chinatown, or you could actually run into people. Did you say you were from Maryland?
Yes.
Well, here's an interesting little tidbit for you. New Mexico, California, Alabama, and Maryland, their state flags are the 4 state flags in the country that does not contain the color blue. The other 46 have blue in their flags. Isn't that an interesting little bit of trivia?
It's a little known fact. Wow.
I know. Isn't that kind of cool?
Yeah.
There's a blog on my website. I think it was 2 or 3 years ago on Flag Day, June 14th. I actually did a blog on the 4 non-blue state flags, and New Mexico was the last of the 4. We came in 1925. But just a little tidbit there. And also, I think it's Baltimore. Had the very first Catholic archdiocese in the country. So that's an interesting thing about it, being a historian here. And it's because Santa Fe is such an incredibly diverse historical place that there are so many connections to other cities around the country. So now I know little tidbits about Maryland and how they somehow relate to Santa Fe. Isn't that cool?
That really is. Yeah, and my wife and I have been to Santa Fe once, where we stayed for a few days. And my camera certainly enjoyed itself. It was beautiful.
Isn't it? Yeah, it's a special place for sure.
It was just full of life and fun. And
everybody, although this is no longer the hometown I grew up in, because everybody is living here now, everybody seems to be very polite and friendly, and everybody says hello. And yeah, so it still has a lot of nice things going for it. But it is different. It's very expensive to live here now. And most local people are gone. They've either passed away and their children are living in other cities because it's too expensive to live here now, like many places in the country.
Yes, absolutely. So when you were little, we're talking 6 years old or something, were you bringing art back home to have your mom tack up on the refrigerator, or were you writing articles?
No, I didn't. That wasn't until later on. But again, my background initially was in theater. I was always acting out. So I was always misbehaving or something. So I think.
That kind of acting out. Okay.
Yeah, it was supposed to be a joke. Get it? But anyway, that wasn't. I'm not that type of. I see myself, I think, as a creative type because I'm an author. But I never. It wasn't. I wasn't good at painting or different things like that. I don't think that's where my creative bent ever. Was not there in the beginning.
Okay, while you were in New York, did you act in any place, or you were strictly crew?
No, I basically did a lot of it's really hard at least it was for me. I tried to go to open auditions and different things, but you had to be a member of Actors Equity, all these things. And so then I did backstage just because I could easily get work doing that. And I had done it here and I liked to do it. I mean, I was a stage manager, so I have a lot of like managerial, talents. But then what I started doing almost within 18 months to 2 years, I started freelance writing for different magazines. Because again, that teacher that told me, she goes, you need to go to New York and be a writer. She didn't tell me to go to New York and be an actress. And so I just kind of heard that. And so I started doing a lot of freelance writing. And again, that's not a big money maker. So I started selling advertising for magazines. And that's how I kind of got this career in ad sales. But I kept writing, as a side thing, but it was how I made my money for many, many years was in ad sales. And then later on, I worked in financial services publishing, which then took me around the world, which was really nice because I was in marketing and sales.
I think in your current job, you need that.
Well,
You need to be
I
able
think
to sell ads and raise money and.
Yeah, well, now it's different. I'm not doing any of that anymore. I closed the magazine in 2009. So all I do now is I really am a writer and, I write scripts for videos. I have 25 different historical talks that I do around town. And so I have to write, I have to create this talk. It's a PowerPoint. So I'm doing that type of writing. I'm the author of 8 books and I'm in the works of doing a 9th book that will be out, if not later this year, then certainly in 2026. And so the writing for me is it's kind of, for me, it's like a giant jigsaw puzzle. And I think it is for most people, especially since I'm doing history, I'm not doing fiction. You could give me like a bunch of different pieces and you could give the same pieces to someone else and they're going to come out with something entirely different, and so am I. So I think that's where the creative process is just in putting together these pieces and putting your own kind of creative slant to the data that you've been handed.
And Santa Fe, pretty much, like you said, has a layered history. So is there one story or figure that you feel is underrepresented or maybe misunderstood, or both?
Well, I think it's the whole history of Santa Fe. And I do this historical walking tour through Santa Fe. And when I get people from all over the country for sure, and occasionally from around the world. And after I do my tour, they're like, we had no idea that any of this had taken place in Santa Fe. Because again, I talk about, so the Spanish come to New Mexico in 1540. They settle in 1598. And then there's another group of Spaniards colonized San Augustine, Florida in 1565. So this nonsense about the founding of America at Plymouth Rock in 1620, it's not true. History is told by the victor. The Spanish are here 80 years before the English. But does anybody know any of this history? For the most part, not really. So just in general, we are the oldest capital city in the United States. People have no idea. And then I talk about when the Indians got mad at the Spaniards and kicked them out for 12 years, that's called the Pueblo Revolt of 1680. So, very few people know about that. So these are really important things. And of course, everybody probably knows about that Santa Fe was the military checkpoint for the Manhattan Project during World War II. So the dawn of the nuclear age gets its start in Santa Fe.
Oh, yeah.
And not too many people are really well versed in that. I mean, the movie Oppenheimer came out last year, so people are kind of still focusing on Los Alamos, but none of that would have taken place if they hadn't had the offices and everything in Santa Fe to clear people through to get up to. Back then, they referred to it as the Hill, not Los Alamos.
Oh, that was.
So there's all kinds of interesting little tidbits. we're the second or third largest art market in the country in terms of art sales. We have the highest on a per capita basis. We have the highest number of art galleries in the country. We have over 300 art galleries. And then getting back to art sales, it's not on a per capita basis, but it fluctuates month to month. So it's New York, Santa Fe, Los Angeles, or New York, Los Angeles, Santa Fe.
Really?
There's a very famous street in Santa Fe called Canyon Road. According to the New York Times, Canyon Road has the highest density of art galleries in the world. In 2005, Santa Fe was named a UNESCO Creative City, United Nations Educational and Cultural City. We were the first city in this country to receive that designation. That is huge. And then most people, they know about the Georgia O'Keeffe Museum here. And a lot of people think that we're a big art market because Georgia O'Keeffe, that it's not true. She doesn't come here. Well, she visits here in 1917. She does not move permanently to New Mexico until 1946, although from 1929 to 1946, she spends her summers in New Mexico. And since this is, you do a lot on art, the Georgia O'Keeffe Museum here in Santa Fe is the most widely visited cultural institution in the state. And it is the only major museum in the world named for a female artist. There is a Frida Kahlo museum in Mexico City, but it's her home with Diego Rivera, so it's more of a memorial. But the Georgia O'Keeffe Museum is the only major museum in the world named for a well-known woman of any note. Not just art. There's not a Queen Victoria museum. How does that happen? But anyway, Santa Fe is proud to say that we do have the only major museum in the world named for the most famous female artist of the 20th century.
Yeah, and I've seen her work, and of course it's magnificent. I guess if it's magnificent, if you appreciate what you're looking at, because a lot of people
and art is interpretive and it's subjective, and so maybe her art isn't for everyone. You know what I mean? Just like somebody else's art may not be for you, but it's for someone else.
Well, I think a lot of that is that people don't see the desert as having any worth or any beauty. And I don't know whether you have to move here, to see the desert as being beautiful.
And it's like that old saying, different strokes for different folks. Yeah. Some people like landscape of the ocean, seascapes, whatever they're called, But I think the important thing about art is that, if you pause and it makes you think, whether you end up liking it or not, but you give it time, that's the objective, I think. It makes you think. And hopefully you'll appreciate what you're seeing.
Yes, there's art that's beautiful, and there's art that makes you think.
Right, yeah.
And I don't know whether they cross or not. I have to think about that.
Well, O'Keeffe's paintings of the desert with skulls in a flower in the skull head, that's beauty to some people.
Yeah.
But it makes you think also. I don't know. I'm just giving you my opinion. I don't profess to be an expert in art or anything.
I thought we're all experts in art.
I'm not. I think I appreciate art. And it's not, everything I see is not what I like. But again, it makes me think. I think maybe that's the ultimate objective, is to get people to think, whether it's reading or art or music or something. Because I think so many of us now, with the internet and all this stuff that's just thrown at us all day long, do we ever take time to just, I hate the old adage, but to take time to just smell the roses, think, sit back for a minute.
Georgia O'Keeffe, I think she spent a lot of time in New York City.
Oh, big time. So the story with Georgia O'Keeffe is she's teaching art in 1917 in Texas. And her and her sister Claudia had been backpacking up at Colorado, and they came through Santa Fe in 1917, which coincidentally was the year that the Fine Arts Museum was built here. But that same year, she moves to New York, and if you know the story about Georgia, she becomes involved with a much older man named Alfred Stieglitz. And then she's involved in the art community there. and she befriends a wealthy oil heiress by the name of Mabel Dodge, who later becomes Mabel Dodge Lujan. And she was the patron to many creative souls in Paris, London, and New York. And she has a summer home up in Taos. So she invites Georgia in 1929 to spend her summer in New Mexico. And that's when Georgia really starts to appreciate all that New Mexico had for her as a visual artist. She once said in a book called Portrait of an Artist that in New Mexico, as an artist, New Mexico does 50% of the work for you. So by 1940, she buys land up in northern New Mexico in an area, in a little village called Abiquiu, in an area of Ghost Ranch. And then in 1946, her husband, Alfred Stieglex, dies. And then by 1949, when she's settled his affairs, she moves out here permanently. She dies here in 1986. She actually dies at St. Vincent Hospital in Santa Fe because by then she's quite elderly and she's got to be close to a hospital. But her ashes were then spread behind her home in Abiquiu at Pedernal Mountain. She was actually born in Sun Prairie, Wisconsin in 1887. The year she was born in Sun Prairie, Wisconsin, her husband, Alfred Stieglex, his photography was being exhibited in Paris. So he was 23 years her senior. He was also an art dealer in New York. He represented Pablo Picasso before the world knew who Pablo Picasso was. So the reason that Georgia O'Keeffe is the best known female artist of the 20th century has everything to do with Alfred Stieglex. She's an incredible artist. There's no disputing that. But given an era when women didn't have a lot of opportunity, he catapulted her to stardom. He gave her her first art exhibit in New York in 1917. And I should back up a little bit. In 1908, she was a student at the Student Arts League in New York.
At 23 years old, he was rather accomplished then at a young age.
Yeah, he was pretty successful. Yeah, he was originally from New Jersey, and his family sent him to to study with some well-known photographer during that era. So photography begins worldwide in Europe in 1839. So not long after that, Alfred Stieglex is actually studying with these very first, like these people that were at the forefront of this art form called photography. So he was very young. And after he finished school, he lived in Europe for about 4 or 5 years before he goes back to New York. And that's when he starts. And his photography, have you ever seen Alfred Stieglex photography?
I don't believe so.
It is incredible. So this is he documents New York City before there's even skyscrapers. It's like horse and buggy and dirt roads and really spectacular stuff. So of the videos I do on my website, I did a two-part video on Alfred and Georgia where you learn more about the couple, but I feature his photography, which is just spectacular. I'm very fond of black and white photography.
Yeah.
And I also have a great appreciation for photography because now with iPhones and Adobe Word, all this stuff, this technology, anybody can be a fairly good photographer. But back then, the black and white photography, that really separate, in my opinion, the artists from just the people that didn't really do that much with photography. I have a great appreciation of black and white photography. In fact, my book that I wrote in 2017, it's called Early Santa Fe, Images of America. It's all the early photographers that came through Santa Fe on the Santa Fe Trail who document Santa Fe during this era. So I'm allowing them to tell the story. So I think that there's even a connection with you. I think you or your son had seen a photo on Charles Dudrow And that's one of the photos in early Santa Fe. I think I'd done a blog on my website or something. So I'm telling the history through the work of these early photographers. And again, this is when they're carrying this huge bulky equipment and all these chemicals. They developed their own film. Their studios were actually tents at the time. A great appreciation for the art of photography. And then that book, I cut off the photos by the early 1950s because that's when color photography comes in. And again, I think there's something kind of special about black and white photography, at least for me, from a personal point of view.
Oh, yes. Yes, black and white photography. For me, especially of people, people in the streets in New York and the young and the old and what they're doing. And yeah.
Well, this is another kind of interesting thing. So the book that I wrote in 2019 was Death Rituals of New Mexico. And there's a whole section on photographing the dead. So way back when, like in the colonial period here in New Mexico, the wealthy Spaniards, when their loved one would die, they would hire an artist to paint their loved one. And they would usually paint him with their eyes open. So they'd have one last image of their loved one. But then again, when photography comes in and it becomes more, later on, it becomes more affordable and accessible to most people, everybody wanted one last picture of their loved one. And the funny thing, I saw a funny little thing in it, is that in the early days of photography, the exposure time was so long. So the photographing the dead were their perfect subjects because they didn't fidget.
No,
they were going to get the right shot.
No, they're not moving. But also you couldn't get their eyes open.
No, you didn't, and that was different. But so I have images of people like at cemeteries before they were going to disappear into the ground. And just, you see pictures of little kids with their grandpa, and they raise the coffin kind of up at an angle. So it's like the last family portrait. So a great appreciation for photography, artists. I love classical music. I mean, that kind of gets me in my own little creative juices going. So I just have an appreciation I'm a kindred spirit to a lot of creative souls. When I published that history magazine for 15 years, I only did 4 issues a year, but I think it was in the spring and in the fall. I think that was or maybe it was the summer and the winter. It was the summer and the winter. I would publish a whole section on poetry. I felt so bad for poets because, I don't think they were appreciated. And I actually paid them for their work. Everybody got paid when I published this magazine. And I just felt that I didn't always understand their poetry, but I just felt that was their creative outlet and they needed a platform. So twice a year, I would include poetry in the magazine.
How do you see the role of women, especially Hispanic and Native women, in the historical narrative of Santa Fe?
Well, it's like everything, and I say this a lot. History is his story. Get it?
Yes.
Yeah. And so, women aren't often, there's not a lot written about women. It's always about the men. And then the reason I even started that magazine is because I wanted the regular people's voices. I didn't want just professional writers. I wanted the oral histories of the regular people being documented. And that was the other thing with history. In the old, history was always about the lords or the people in, the powerful and the rich. And I think it's changing a little bit. There is a program here in New Mexico. It's called the New Mexico Women's Marker Program, where I think it's funded through the state of New Mexico. And women are going around and they're putting markers about historically, women that contributed historically to the state's well-being. And so I think little by little, we're seeing more of that. Certainly, and in that group, it's not just Hispanic, but they are acknowledging Indigenous women and just, and just regular women, Anglo women, African American women. So I think that we're seeing there's more of a concerted effort right now to do that. And I should point out, our former Secretary of the Interior under the Biden administration, her name is Deb Haaland. She's from Laguna Pueblo. And she's currently now in 2026, she's going to be running for governor of New Mexico.
Yeah, that's
so
what
I think,
I heard.
and we've had our current governor, Michelle Lujan Grisham, she's been the governor for 8 years now. So women have always played an important part in Santa Fe history. and New Mexico history and history in general, but it's never going to be, it's always going to take a backseat, or at least in the past, it has taken the backseat to men because just the way the world works.
Yes.
So, I'm glad that things are starting to change a little, and maybe they'll just continue to change. But the most important thing is that it all gets documented, because then if there's a record of it, then it does exist. Here in New Mexico, one of the women that worked with Susan B. Anthony on the suffrage movement, her name was Adelina Otero, but she went by Nina Otero. So there's a school named after her here in Santa Fe. And I think it was in 2008, or maybe not that long ago, there's now a U.S. quarter, a coin for Nina Otero Warren. She later married a Warren. But she was very instrumental in helping with the suffrage movement from New Mexico.
Addie, your faithful down under research assistant, breaking in quickly with a little more in-depth detail on Nina Otero. Adelina, Nina, Otero Warren, 1881 to 1965, was a pioneering figure in New Mexico's women's suffrage movement and a trailblazer for Hispanic women in American politics. Born near Los Lunas, New Mexico, into two of the region's most prominent Hispano families, Otero Warren was raised in a bilingual and bicultural environment. Her upbringing instilled in her a deep appreciation for both Spanish and Anglo-American cultures, which later influenced her advocacy for bilingual education and cultural preservation. Otero Warren played a crucial role in New Mexico's ratification of the 19th Amendment. As the head of the state's Congressional Union for Woman Suffrage, she utilized her bilingual skills to engage both English and Spanish-speaking communities, emphasizing the importance of women's voting rights across cultural lines. Her efforts were instrumental in New Mexico becoming the 32nd state to ratify the amendment in 1920. In 1922, Otero Warren became the first Latina to run for the U.S. Congress representing the Republican Party. Although she was not elected, her candidacy marked a significant milestone for Hispanic women in politics. Earlier, she had been appointed as the first female superintendent of public schools in Santa Fe County, where she advocated for bilingual and bicultural education, improved teacher salaries, and better school facilities. Beyond her political and educational endeavors, Otero Warren was also an author, publishing Old Spain in Our Southwest in 1936, which chronicled her experiences and the cultural heritage of New Mexico. In recognition of her contributions, the U.S. Mint featured her on a quarter in 2022 as part of the American Women Quarters program, making her the first Hispanic woman to appear on U.S. currency. Nina Otero Warren's legacy endures as a testament to her dedication to civil rights, education, and cultural preservation in New Mexico and beyond. Anna, I am enjoying your discussion here today and hope if I can ever visit the States, I can make it to Santa Fe.
Yeah, she played an important part here. And then in terms of education, that's why there's a school named after her. Yeah, so then I think finally women are, at least now it's becoming a little bit more fair or more even, more balanced, where more women are starting to get their due.
One of the other things you're talking about is ordinary people, farmers, shepherds, dancers. One of the artists that you had liked, his name was Pedro Rivera Ortega.
Yeah, Pedro Rivera Ortega. He was actually a close friend of my parents growing up here. And he was, I'm funny that you mentioned him right now. The reason I even started this magazine was because of Pedro Rivera Ortega. When I came back from New York and by then this was 1992, Santa Fe was already starting to change. It was starting to get more expensive. A lot of the Hispanics were moving to less expensive places to live. He was the last Spanish editor of the Santa Fe New Mexican. He was an educator at Santa Fe High, and he did write books on Spanish culture. And he's the one who told me, he says, Ana, we're at the 11th hour. If we don't start documenting all this information, it's going to be, it's going to go away. So he was the reason that I started this magazine because of what he told me. So it's funny that you just mentioned him. It all kind of ties together.
Yeah, fabulous. Unfortunately, I haven't had a chance to research his work.
He did a lot of good for the community. Really, I'm so grateful that when he did pass away at the University of New Mexico, there's a program. I don't know the name of it, but I know I was interviewed for it about Pete. I knew Miss Pete. But there's like you can at the I don't know if it's called the Chicano Studies or some department at the University of New Mexico in Albuquerque. They've documented and they've kept a lot of his work there. So. And that's the wonderful thing, because then students can research his work and they can learn from what he did and different things like that. But so his legacy has been preserved at the University of New Mexico. So I'm so happy for him.
Was there ever any pushback from the native peoples to the Catholic religion?
Big time. That's why in 1680 they kicked everybody out. So what happens when the Spanish get here? Catholicism is the only religion in New Mexico for 236 years. So the Spanish, I'm not talking about the spirituality of the indigenous, but when the Spanish get here, that we're part of Spain from 1598 until 1821. Then Mexico comes in 1821 to 1846. So Catholicism is the only religion, and Spanish is the predominant language for 236 years. Now, I know that doesn't make sense. The math should say 248 years, but for 12 years, the Spanish get kicked out.
Oh, okay.
So what happens when the Spanish get here, they're basically pretty cruel to the indigenous, and they force them into Catholicism. And the Franciscan missionaries who come from medieval Europe, they see the medicine men, who are considered the high priests of each tribe, doing their rituals and ceremonies. And they're convinced that's witchcraft or black magic. So to put an end to that, in 1675, some people say 1676, right around that time, the Spanish military rounds up 47 religious leaders from the surrounding Indian pueblos, and they take them to the Santa Fe Plaza. They publicly flog them. So they whip and humiliate these high priests. And by then, the indigenous have had it with the cruelty by the Spaniards. You start whipping their medicine men, and we are done. So in 1680, a medicine man by the name of Pope, he was from Oque Owinge Pueblo, he masterminds the Pueblo Revolt of 1680. So they kick all the Spaniards out for 12 years. They force them out down to El Paso del Norte, which was then Mexico and is El Paso, Texas today. So for 12 years, the Spanish are forced out. They do come back in 1692. That's when my family gets here. And how they're able to make amends or to make peace with the indigenous. It doesn't happen. It's not very smooth in the beginning. But they basically say to them, because they had a lot of time to think when they were forced out for 12 years, the one thing that really angered the indigenous that they hurt their medicine men, their rituals. And so when the Spanish come back, they say, you know what? We really respect your spirituality. You keep doing all of that, and you can still be a Catholic. And all 19 Indian pueblos eventually agreed to that. So today in New Mexico, all 19 Indian pueblos has a Catholic church on it and a patron saint. But when that took place in 1692, that was the first instance of a convergence of spiritualities in this country. And I always point out that was like a cool thing that happened because of the Spaniards. When the Pilgrims get here at Plymouth Rock, they don't tell the Indians you can be a Protestant and keep your own spiritual stuff going. They killed that for them. So that's kind of a cool thing. Even though the Spanish did some terrible things initially, when they come back, it's a little bit better. And I have to point out also, the Spanish, under Spanish land grant laws, they would never take away occupied land. When the Americans got here, they took over everything and they stuck the Indians on reservations. So New Mexico is the only state in the Union where 19 different pueblos are still living on their ancestral land. So pueblo is a Spanish word that means little town or village. In other parts of the country, you would refer to them as tribes or reservations. So New Mexico is the only state in the Union where indigenous people continue to live on their ancestral land. Isn't that cool? For all the bad that they did, some good came out of it. And there's another thing that I always mention. I always talk about three things the Spanish did better than the Americans. When the Americans get here on the Santa Fe Trail in 1822, the first thing that really surprises them, Spanish women were smoking cigarettes. They were also business owners and they were property owners. Under Spanish law, women had rights. If you were an American woman in 1822, you were property of your husband. If you weren't married, you were property of your father. If your father had passed away, this is the one I really hate, you were property of your brothers. So that's the third thing that Spain does better than the Americans. So in spite of all the bad they did and the kind of, bad rap they get even today, I think they did a few things better than the Americans.
Yeah, they did, because that property of your brothers, and I can cite some examples I won't here, that's still happening.
Oh, can't be.
Yeah, it is.
I don't know, maybe like in, some different, but
anyway. It's families. Families are, that's the way things are in families, so.
Right. Well, the sad thing, until the 1970s, I couldn't even, until the mid-1970s, I wasn't allowed to get my own credit card unless my husband signed for it. I wasn't even married back then. But that's how, we don't even look back. I mean, we look to the suffragette movement, 1920 or whatever it was, or early 1900s. We don't even look at in the early 1970s, women couldn't take out a bank loan. They couldn't get their own credit card. So we're not, it hasn't happened as fast as we had hoped, I don't think.
No, and my wife knows that well. 1974, she had a very good job. For that matter, she was making more money than me, and she wanted to buy me a color TV for my birthday, and she couldn't get a loan on it without me co-signing.
Yep. So
not that long ago.
I know.
So if you could write about just one moment in Santa Fe's history, what would it be and why?
Well, maybe it would be when the Spanish do come back here and somehow they're able to make this arrangement with the indigenous, where there is a convergence of spiritualities, where this old European faith is somehow melding into a nature-based faith, and they kind of come together. Maybe that would be it.
Yeah, and that's really so interesting. When I'll get off subject a little bit here, but when they kicked them out, was that easy, or was there fighting, or?
Oh, big time. This is the cool thing. And so did you ever spend a lot of time in Washington, D.C., since you're from Maryland?
I was born in Washington, D.C., so.
Okay, so every state in the Union has two statues that represent their state in Washington, D.C. So there is a statue of Popeye. Popeye is one of our two statues. And so his statue can be found at the entrance of the Visitor Center at Emancipation Hall in Washington, D.C. The other statue, just to quickly let you know, was a Senator Dennis Chavez, who was a powerful Democratic senator during the Great Depression. He was instrumental in getting the Panama Highway built. So his statue is at Statuary Hall. But getting back to Popeye's statue there, it has a rope with 5 knots on it. So what happened with Popeye is first I should point out that different pueblos spoke different languages, not dialects, but somehow they could communicate. They didn't have any horses. The Spaniards bring the horses to the New World. And so he gets young men in their prime. They're called the revolt runners, and they were like relay runners. And he gave each of the runners a piece of rope that was made of strips of deerskin hide, and each rope contained 5 knots. And so they all navigated with the stars. So when they got to unraveling the last knot, that date was August the 10th, 1680. And that was the day that they were going to attack. They all knew that when they got to that last rope, that was the attack date. And so that day was August the 10th, 1680. So about that time, there's probably about maybe 15 or 20,000 indigenous people and there's maybe about 5 to 7,000 Spaniards. But the reason the Spaniards have the upper hand is because they're the ones with the horses, and they did have these rudimentary kind of pistols or some kind of weaponry that the indigenous didn't have access to. So that's sort of how they were able to keep control for all those years. But then the way they were able to drive them out was with fire. They had spears or tomahawks or something, but the main thing the indigenous used was fire. And the first thing they did was burn the churches because they were forced into a religion that they didn't want to be it. And so that was how they did it. They basically drove them out. They were many, a few did die, but it wasn't like half of them or something in terms of the Spaniards. The main thing they did is they just kicked them the heck out of here. And why the Pueblo Revolt of 1680 is so important to New Mexico's history is that the indigenous, the Pueblo Indians, who, by the way, were descendants of the Anasazi, the ancient indigenous civilization that was in this area more than 1,000 years ago. The interesting thing about the indigenous here in New Mexico, the Pueblo Indians, they were farmers. They were never a nomadic people. They weren't a violent people. And so for them to have finally gotten mad enough to kick out the Spaniards, that was like a big deal, and they were successful at it. So that's why that's a very important date, the most historically significant date in New Mexico's history. And the fact that the Spaniards were able to come back, they were able to negotiate a deal that is working right now. Some people may not agree with that, but it's in place. And here we are today.
Wow, that's incredible. I never knew that story. Could that have been the start of the saying, "I'm at the end of my rope"?
That's funny that you said that. I don't know. I'd never thought it. Probably not, but I like that.
But
it could be, though. It could be.
But you just said not, so could it be at the end of my knot?
Yeah, and and it really wasn't. Yeah, we call it a rope now, but it maybe back then I don't even know what rope is made out of. But that's why back then it was made from strips of deerskin hide because there wasn't a lot of that back then. Pretty interesting stuff. I'm so amazed. The work that I do here as a historian and an author, and I do public. I do lectures and I do tours. I do all these things here. I learn more every day. I am just blown away at the diversity and just the depth of Santa Fe history. In the last 30 or 40 years, Santa Fe's become very gentrified and it's very upscale. And they try to compare Santa Fe with Sedona. Sedona wishes it was Santa Fe. We're not just another pretty face. We have depth and substance. I honestly feel that Santa Fe is the most historically significant city in this country in terms of the diverse historical events that have impacted the world here. I'm actually working on a new book now and I've got about 400 bullet points right now about all the things that have only ever happened in Santa Fe. It's pretty cool. And the funny thing for me is this is my hometown, and I hated Santa Fe growing up here because it was a little podunkville. Back then, we're about 90,000 people now. It was maybe 45, 50,000 when I was in high school here. And unlike today, we didn't have all the technological advances. We would get movies 6 months after the rest of the country. This was podunkville. So you better believe I was happy to run away to New York when I was 19. I couldn't wait to get out of here. I was never coming back. But my mom brought me back here. And now I love it. But I needed those years of experience in New York to I see Santa Fe in a different light now. And I needed all that professional experience. But I really do, I attribute it to my mother bringing me back here when she was dying. But because she's left us, she and her family had come here in 1692, 300 years later, I was then equipped with being able to start putting all these pieces together. And so every day when I do these different tours or talks, I'm really paying homage to my ancestors. And somehow I kind of think, I hope you're out there listening. I hope you know I'm mentioning you, or I don't know how this stuff works after you die, but I would like to think that all the work that I'm doing, that somehow those souls are out there and they're saying, look at Ana, she's still trying to promote Santa Fe history for us. So who knows? Who knows?
Well, the most one can hope for when they pass along is that somebody mentions their name down the road.
That's what they say, that if when they stop mentioning your name, then you're forgotten forever.
Yes.
But from a historic perspective, I'm not just mentioning their name, I'm writing it down. I'm documenting it. So the written word, unless the whole world gets blown up, hopefully that'll be around.
What advice would you give to, I'm sure when you're giving tours, there's probably younger kids and high school kids who are on your tours. If you could tell them about, give them advice if they want to be an artist or historian, explore their heritage.
It's funny you mentioned that. I had a young woman last week, and she said, I want to be a writer. She wants to write fantasy fiction or something. And she said, what advice can you give me? And I said, make sure you have another career to fall back on, because, for any creative, whether you are an artist, a writer, or photographer, very few people, especially in the beginning, can make a go of their creative side. So it's always important to have, you don't have to maybe have a 4-year college degree, but you better have computer skills or something that can help you pay the bills while you can. So for me, basically, I'm a businesswoman. I can still do things in the business world if I have to. That's my main advice to anybody is don't just say you're an artist and sit on your laurels and hope that the world's going to come knocking on your door. Make sure you have some kind of an educational background or some kind of skill that you can fall back on, because there are going to be the lean years, and not everybody's going to be a best-selling author. Not everybody's going to be a Georgia O'Keeffe. So you need to think, you have to be practical.
Yeah, those careers are few and far between.
Well, I think for some people that are really driven, you can't wait until you retire, because by then you might have that kind of creative spark you had. It might have dimmed by then. You may not have the same as a writer. You can't just you hope you're going to write a bestseller after 30 years of not doing anything. So I think people that do have that creative bent, they have to find time, even if it's just a little bit. They have to make sure they're doing something in addition to their real job. Otherwise, I think it's hard to pick up. Maybe later on, but my advice would be to have some discipline and somehow allot some kind of time to the type of project that's going to speak to your soul, that's speaking to you. Making money to pay the bills is what we have to do. But you want something that's going to give you that passion, that drive. You've got to keep it kind of there somewhere.
Yeah, very true. Last question then. What's inspired you this past week?
Well, I don't know if it's just, every day, just doing the stuff that I do and putting together these talks and just, for me, I have an agenda. I am going to keep Santa Fe history alive. And I have to tell you this, no one's in Santa Fe. Very few people that live in Santa Fe are from Santa Fe anymore. All the Hispanic and the indigenous have been pushed out because of the high cost of housing here. So I have an agenda. I am, as a Santa Fean, going to keep the deep, rich history of Santa Fe alive. And that's that, I guess.
Yeah, and that's great. And I need to come and visit sometime.
You certainly do. I'm so happy that you came, that through my website or your son or somebody found your ancestor. And so isn't that the beauty of what I'm doing right now? Somehow you connected with me through that work. So that to me says, well, I'm doing the right thing by doing all this.
It was the older son, and he happened through there. He's, as a little kid, he'd always been. Yeah, we took him down to New Mexico Military Institute to see
In Roswell.
to see if he wanted to go there. On the way home, he said, "Oh, we got to stop by Billy the Kid's grave." So we did, and he's always been interested in Billy the Kid. So, did you know about this Charles Dudrow? And I said, "Yes, I did. I'd heard about that before." That's where I found your name, and that's why we're talking now.
I want to thank you so much for even wanting to interview me for the last hour. And I hope that your listeners, that hopefully there'll be some type of an inspiration, with their creative spark. And if nothing else, please come to Santa Fe and take my tour. Is it okay if I just let your listeners know about my website? historyinsantafe.com. And there's over 100 videos, there's blogs, there's books, there's a Santa Fe guide. So if people are coming to visit Santa Fe, there's so much information ready. There's 1,500 web links of things to do in Albuquerque, Santa Fe, and northern New Mexico. So there's so much information that you can just get from, and I put that all together during the COVID, when we were all stuck at home during COVID. So a lot of work went into that website. So I'm hoping that people will get something from that. Well, I thank you so very much. And you're doing a terrific job. Thank you so much for all the work that you're doing for artists around the world.
All right. Thank you, Ana. I was so excited for today. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Go have a great week.
You do the same. Take care.
All right,
Bye.
bye.
Broadcasting from the Mesquite Works Steam Center in the scenic Mojave Desert, the Art Box sponsors thank you for listening. You can find us on Spotify, Samsung, iHeartRadio, Podchaser, and Amazon Music. Please subscribe so you don't miss an episode. We are on Facebook and Instagram as The Art Box. We welcome all comments. You can email us at artboxvv@gmail.com. The views and opinions expressed on this podcast are those of its hosts and guests and do not necessarily reflect those of our sponsors.